Chapter 1, Rebirth in Aslan. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was the cold, hard stone beneath me. The second was the intense headache, as if my brain had been scrambled and forcefully reset. Groaning, I sat up, my vision slowly coming into focus. The dark, underground ceiling of my small, windowless room came into view. The last thing I remembered was cursing at my computer, laughing at how easily I could conquer the game if only I had control of the villain. And then a lightning strike, blinding and impossibly loud. Next thing I knew, I was here. I blinked. No way. I stumbled over to the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The face staring back at me was all too familiar. Pale skin, sharp, almost cruel eyes, and a body that radiated latent strength. It wasn't my face, but I recognized it immediately. This was the villain of the game, the character I had spent countless hours playing. The guy who was mocked by the heroes, shunned by the girl he loved, and eventually crushed by the game's protagonist. But not this time. A grin spread across my face. Somehow, I'd reincarnated into the villain's body, the same guy I had mocked while playing the game. But instead of fear, all I felt was excitement. I knew everything about this world. Every twist, every hidden secret, every technique. I was 1 week away from the mandatory enlistment into the Aslan City Watch training program, and I had just enough time to set things right. The villain's life in the game had gone downhill after he confessed his love to Princess Lin Mei, the game's stunning, unattainable heroine, only to be humiliated when the hero, Wei Leon, made his failure public. It was a crushing moment of mockery that had burned deep into the villain's soul, spurring him to form the infamous Blood Guild and seek revenge against the nobility. Wei Leon had used the moment to cement his place as the golden boy of the story, rising to fame as the hero who was loved by everyone. This time, however, I wasn't playing by the same rules. I had no interest in Wei Leon's heroism or Lin Mei's dismissal. Instead, I was going to show them all that this so-called villain was the true power in this world. I wasn't here to destroy the world. I was here to dominate it and have fun doing it. The world of Aslan and the City Watch training program. Aslan was a world unlike any other. The city was deep underground, carved into the earth beneath towering mountains, and the inhabitants had lived there for centuries, isolated from the surface. Resources were scarce in the safe zones, where little cultivation energy filtered through the rock. But beyond the city's borders lay the wild zones. Dangerous areas teeming with powerful beasts, unrestrained cultivation energy, and most importantly, spirit cores and spirit crystals. These spirit cores were extracted from beasts, granting cultivators a surge in power, while spirit crystals were used for both cultivation and currency. They were the lifeblood of Aslan, and whoever controlled the flow of these resources controlled everything. To maintain order and ensure survival, every citizen, even nobles, had to enlist in the Shadow Trials, a 2-year training program under the Aslan City Watch. It was a brutal test of survival, combat, and leadership, where participants were ranked by their cultivation strength and divided into factions. The top 30 ranked cultivators would become commanders, tasked with recruiting their own squads and leading them in battle, resource collection, and raids. The others would be divided into groups by these commanders, forming alliances and occasionally clashing over precious resources. But here was the twist. The greatest rewards were found in the dangerous wild zones. And while the safe zones provided just enough energy to sustain low-level cultivators, the real treasure lay in the most dangerous areas, where spirit cores and crystals were abundant, but fiercely guarded by beasts of terrifying strength. In the game, I knew exactly how the villain had failed. He'd been too focused on revenge. This time, I was going to take a different route. I wouldn't wait to be humiliated. I'd be one of those top 30 commanders. No, I'd be the best. I had 1 week to prepare before the Shadow Trials began. 1 week to cultivate in secret, using the knowledge I'd gained from playing the game over and over again. 1 week to ensure that I, a commoner, would rise to power. The cultivation system. The cultivation system in Aslan was divided into 5 stages, each requiring increasingly rare and powerful spirit cores and crystals to advance. 1. Iron Vein. The first stage, where cultivators begin refining their spirit force, building the foundation for future growth. 2. Copper Vein. At this stage, Cultivators begin to unlock special techniques and can absorb small amounts of spirit energy from the environment. 3. Silver Core, a significant jump in power. At this stage, cultivators can absorb the energy from spirit cores, enhancing their abilities greatly. 4. Gold Core. Those who reach this stage can control vast amounts of spirit energy and are capable of leading others in battle. 5. Spirit Tyrant, the highest known level of cultivation. Spirit Tyrants can absorb multiple spirit cores at once and are unmatched in combat. The key to advancing was the careful balance of absorbing spirit cores and refining the spirit crystals used for cultivation. But I knew of techniques, hidden ones, that could speed up my progress and allow me to leap ahead of the other trainees. New plans, new goals. I couldn't just charge into the shadow trials unprepared. I had to act fast. In the game, the villain had spent most of his time in the city, gathering support from commoners. This time, I would go into the wild zones ahead of schedule. I knew the exact locations of certain beasts, ones that would be just strong enough to give me a boost, but not so strong that I couldn't defeat them with the villain's current abilities. If I could gather enough spirit cores in the next few days, I'd have enough power to enter the shadow trials as a serious contender for one of the commander positions. I knew who the other top contenders would be. Noble heirs, talented warriors, and the main protagonist himself. And of course, Princess Lin Mei, who was practically guaranteed a spot. But Lin Mei wasn't my main focus. The one I had my sights on now was Wei Lian, the so-called hero of the story. He wasn't just a party animal or some careless fool. He was my enemy, the man who had humiliated me in the game. He had stolen the spotlight, mocked me, and crushed me without a second thought. This time, it would be different. I wouldn't just defeat Wei Lian. I would humiliate him. I would make him suffer the way he had made me suffer in the game. He wouldn't be the golden hero anymore. I would strip him of everything, his power, his reputation, and his pride. As for Lin Mei, she would come to me eventually. She would see the strength I had, and she would realize that I was the one worthy of her attention, not Wei Lian. But I wouldn't make the same mistake I did in the game. I wouldn't confess to her. I would make her chase me. After all, I knew exactly what she wanted: power, control, and someone strong enough to stand by her side. But first, I had to get strong enough to make it all happen. With a final glance at my reflection, I turned away from the mirror, a grin tugging at my lips. I know all the tricks. This time, I'm going to win. Chapter 2. A Chance Encounter. The winding alleys of Aslan's lower district were dimly lit by the flickering light of torches that lined the crumbling walls. The streets were narrow, filled with the scent of damp stone and the remnants of long-forgotten meals. This part of the city was rarely visited by the nobles. It was where commoners like me lived, scraping by to survive. But tonight, it wasn't survival I was focused on. It was strength. 1 week. That was all the time I had before the shadow trials began, and I needed every advantage I could muster before stepping into that arena. The wild zones beyond the city walls were filled with the kind of power I needed. Spirit cores, spirit crystals, and untapped cultivation energy far greater than anything we could find here in the city's safe zones. But the wild zones were dangerous, deadly even. And I had no intention of going out there unprepared. I moved swiftly through the alleys, my thoughts racing. The shadow trials would decide everything, whether I could stand among the top 30 commanders, whether I would have a chance to carve my name into Aslan's history. There was no room for mistakes, and I knew that the wild zones held my key to success. I just had to get there. But not through the main gates. The guards were always watching, and I couldn't afford to draw attention to myself. I'd have to take a different route. The sewers, ancient tunnels built long before the city, would give me the cover I needed. It wouldn't be pleasant, but it was the perfect way to slip out unnoticed. As I passed by the outer wall of the city, something pulled me from my thoughts. A small, soft sound, almost like a gasp. I slowed my pace, turning toward the source. Just ahead was the orphanage, an old and crumbling building barely standing against the city wall. It was a place where commoners with no family were sent, forgotten by society. The children who lived there were the lowest of the low in Aslan's hierarchy, destined to be the first victims if the city was ever attacked by beasts. No one cared what happened to them. No one except me. Sitting alone outside the orphanage, her knees drawn up to her chest, was a girl. She was thin, dressed in rags that barely covered her body, and her hair was tangled, hiding most of her face. The dirt on her skin masked her true appearance, but I could still see the hunger in her eyes as she hugged her knees, trying to stay warm in the chill of the night air. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding. Aiko. I recognized her instantly, though in this state, no one else would have. She was a commoner in the game, just like now, but in a few years, she would grow into one of the most stunning and powerful women in Aztlan, rivaling even Princess Lin Mei. I remembered her clearly. Her silver hair would eventually cascade down her back like a waterfall, her sharp blue eyes filled with strength, and her full lips, those voluptuous lips that added a sensual elegance to her features. Even now, despite being dirty and underfed, Aiko's natural beauty couldn't be entirely hidden. Her body, though frail from hunger, was already well endowed, her figure still showing signs of the strength she would grow into. It was almost absurd to think that no one noticed her potential. But they would. In time. Aiko had always been overlooked in her youth, but when she rose to power, her famous line would become known throughout Aztlan. If no one took interest in me when I was covered in dirt and hungry, don't take interest in me now. She rejected everyone who came crawling to her once she was strong, and I couldn't blame her. But here I was, knowing exactly who she was and what she would become. I couldn't let this chance slip by. She didn't know it yet, but Aiko was destined to be one of the greatest, and with my knowledge, I could help her reach that potential faster. I could make her my greatest ally. I stepped forward, pulling some dried meat from my bag as I approached her quietly. "Hey," I called out softly. Her head snapped up at the sound of my voice, and her sharp blue eyes met mine with suspicion. She didn't say a word, just stared at me, as if trying to figure out why a stranger was approaching her in the middle of the night. "You look hungry," I said, kneeling down and holding out the food. "Take this." Her eyes flicked to the food, then back to me. Her stomach growled, but her face was guarded. She was too proud to beg, too proud to show weakness, even now. But I could see the hunger in her eyes. I knew she was starving. For a moment she hesitated, clearly weighing her options. She didn't trust me. Why should she? No one in her position would. But after a few moments of silence, she snatched the food from my hand and devoured it as if she hadn't eaten in days. She probably hadn't. As she ate, I sat down beside her, keeping my voice calm. "My name's Rentian." Aiko didn't respond at first. She was still watching me, trying to figure out my angle, as though expecting me to ask for something in return. She was smart. I had to give her that. People like us, commoners, didn't get offered handouts without a catch. "You're from the orphanage, right?" I asked. "Living by the city wall must be tough. First to die if the beasts ever break through." She swallowed the last of the food, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, still eyeing me warily. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp and defensive. I smiled slightly. She wasn't easy to fool, and I respected that. "I want to help you," I said simply. "I'm leaving the city tonight, heading into the wild zones, to get stronger, and I can help you do the same." Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. "Why would you help me?" "Because I see potential in you," I replied. "You have what it takes to be strong, but you need the right opportunity. I'm offering you that chance. Come with me tomorrow, and I'll show you how to cultivate, how to fight. I'll teach you everything you need to know." Aiko stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She didn't trust me. Not yet. But I knew that look in her eyes. She was considering it. She wanted to believe me. But people like us didn't get offered partnerships without strings attached. Still, the idea of escaping her life here, of becoming stronger, it was tempting. I could see it in the way her fingers tightened around the scraps of food I'd given her. "You don't have to decide now," I said, standing up. "I'm leaving at dawn. Meet me by the sewer entrance near the eastern gate if you want to come." I turned and walked away, not waiting for her response. I knew she wouldn't decide immediately, but I had a feeling she'd show up. She was too smart not to take this chance. Entering the sewers. The moment I left Aiko, I made my way through the darkened streets, my pace quickening. Time was running short, and I had to slip out of the city before anyone noticed I was gone. The sewers were the best route, hidden from the guards' eyes and rarely used by anyone other than the most desperate. I reached the sewer entrance near the eastern gate, a rusted grate covered in grime and debris. It was tucked away, half hidden by the crumbling stone of the wall, but it was exactly what I needed. I glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then pried the grate open with a soft groan of metal. The stench hit me immediately: rotting water, damp stone, and the waste of the city above. The sewers were a forgotten part of Aslan, ignored by the nobles and guards alike. It was filthy, but I didn't care. This was my way out. Slipping inside, I felt the darkness close in around me. The narrow tunnels echoed with the sound of dripping water, and the air was thick with moisture. I gripped the walls for balance as I descended further into the depths, careful to avoid the slick stones beneath my feet. The sewers twisted and turned like a maze, but I had memorized the layout. It wouldn't take long to reach the outer tunnels, the ones that would lead me to the wild zones. Chapter 3. A Deal for Power. The cold, damp air clung to my skin as I crawled through the narrow, twisting tunnels of the sewer. The faint light from above had long since disappeared, leaving me in near-total darkness, guided only by the echoes of dripping water and the map of the sewers I had memorized. I kept moving, my steps careful but quick, knowing that this would be the easiest part of my plan. Breaking into the training site would be the real challenge. After what felt like an hour, I finally spotted the faint outline of a grate ahead of me. I pushed against the metal bars, the rust giving way with a soft groan, and climbed out into the crisp night air. I was now beyond the city walls, standing in the safe zone, where the training would take place in 1 week. The area was quiet, no patrols, no guards. No one expected anyone to be here early. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the fresh air and taking in my surroundings. The safe zone was exactly what the name suggested. A section of land beyond the city that was still under Aslan's protection, with few beasts and plenty of resources, but far from the wild zone's dangerous energy. It was the perfect place to gather resources without worrying about being attacked by powerful spirit beasts. And more importantly, it was the perfect place to cultivate in secret. I had a week. 1 week to get stronger, gather spirit cores, and ensure that I would become one of the top 30 commanders in the Shadow Trials. But first, I needed tools. Mining tools, specifically. I made my way toward the training site, a series of buildings and supply sheds that would serve as the base for the trials. The area was well equipped with everything the participants would need: training weapons, potions, rations, and mining tools. Normally, it would be heavily guarded during the trials, but tonight, no one was here. No one expected anyone to show up a week early. I approached the nearest shed, testing the door. Locked. No surprise. With a quick look around to make sure no one was watching, I crouched low and fiddled with the lock and a soft click. The door creaked open, and I slipped inside. The room was filled with supplies. Everything from weapons to potions to basic tools. I quickly found what I was looking for: mining picks, shovels, and a few scent-nullifying potions. The potions would be especially useful, masking my scent from any beasts lurking nearby while I worked. I grabbed what I needed and turned to leave, my bag now heavier with tools. But just as I reached the door, a voice stopped me in my tracks. "What are you doing?" I froze, my heart pounding. Slowly, I turned around to see Aiko standing in the doorway, her silver hair catching the faint moonlight that filtered through the cracks in the shed. Her blue eyes were sharp, but her expression was unreadable. I hadn't expected her to follow me. "I guess you didn't trust me, so you followed me," I said, forcing a grin to hide my surprise. Aiko crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "You're right. I didn't. You're hiding something, Ren. What's really going on?" For a moment, I considered brushing her off, telling her it was none of her business. But then I realized something. Aiko could be useful. She wasn't just any commoner. She had the potential to become one of the most powerful magic cultivators in Aslan. If I played this right, I could gain an ally who could help me rise to the top. I sighed, pretending to drop the pretense. "All right, I'll tell you the truth." Aiko stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Go on." "I want to become a commander in the Shadow Trials," I said. "I'm tired of being a commoner, tired of scraping by with nothing. I want to enjoy life, to be rich, buy whatever I want, eat the finest food, drink until I puke, and, well, let's just say I wouldn't mind fooling around with the maids every now and then. Aiko raised an eyebrow at that, but I saw a flicker of amusement in her eyes. I have the knowledge, I continued, of powerful cultivation techniques and places where we can mine spirit crystals safely, places no one else knows about. But here's the problem. I don't have a single dime to my name. Not even enough to buy a shovel. That's where you come in. Aiko tilted her head slightly, curious. And what exactly do you want from me? I can give you a powerful magic cultivation technique, I said, my voice dropping to a more serious tone. The kind that could turn you into one of the strongest magic cultivators in Aztlan. In exchange, I need you to help me create beast cores. You see, I don't have the money to hire a magic cultivator to make them for me, and only a magic cultivator can turn the essence we extract from beasts into full cores. Aiko stared at me for a long moment, her face thoughtful. She was considering the offer. I could tell she wasn't the type to agree to something easily, but she was smart. She knew the potential of what I was offering. And what do you get out of this? She asked, finally. Beast cores, I replied. With enough of them, I can level up my cultivation quickly and get strong enough to become a commander. That's the deal. You help me, and in return, you get everything I promised. Money, power, the ability to buy whatever you want, eat whatever you want. Hell, even the maids, if that's your thing. Aiko's expression didn't change, but I saw the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She looked at me for a moment longer before finally speaking. Everything you just said, she began slowly, down to the part about the maids. I want the same things. I blinked, momentarily taken aback. Wait, you? What? Aiko's blue eyes glinted mischievously as she crossed her arms. You heard me. If I'm going to help you, I want to live the same life you're aiming for. I want the riches, the freedom, the luxury, and yes, even the maids. I stared at her, stunned, and then it clicked. I understood now why, in the future, no one had been able to win her over. They had all assumed she wanted wealth and power like everyone else, but none of them had ever realized she wanted it all, down to the very last detail. I couldn't help myself. I burst out laughing. I guess that explains a lot more about you than I first thought. Aiko shrugged, unfazed. It's just practical. Why settle for less? I wiped the tears of laughter from my eyes and grinned at her. All right then, deal. She smiled, an actual smile this time, and nodded. Deal. The power of beast cores and spirit crystals. As we sat down to finalize our plan, I began explaining the details of how cultivation worked in this world, just as I had learned from countless hours spent in this reality. All right, here's how it works, I said, pulling out a small vial from my bag. This is beast core essence. Every time you kill a beast, you can extract an essence from its core. The stronger the beast, the more essence you get. But here's the catch. It's almost never a full core. You need to kill multiple beasts of the same kind to gather enough essence to make a full core. Aiko nodded, listening carefully. So you have to hunt the same type of beast over and over to get a usable core? Exactly, I said. Once you have enough essence, someone with a magic cultivation technique can fuse the essence together to form a full core. That's where you come in. With your magic technique, you'll be able to take the essence we gather and turn it into full beast cores. And with those cores, I'll be able to level up my cultivation. And what about spirit crystals? She asked. I held up one of the scent-nullifying potions I had grabbed from the shed earlier. Spirit crystals are a bit different. You can mine them directly from the earth or get them from killing beasts. They're rarer than essence, but can be used both for cultivation and as currency. The mining tools we took will help us extract the crystals, but the real challenge will be finding the best spots to mine without running into trouble. Aiko's eyes gleamed with interest. And you know where to find these places? I smirked. I know exactly where to find them. That's the advantage of having all this knowledge. No one else knows these spots exist. Aiko leaned back, clearly impressed. All right, I'm in. You give me the magic technique, and I'll make you the beast cores. And once we're strong enough, I finished for her, we'll be living the life we've always wanted. We both stood, the deal now sealed. This partnership was the first step towards something much bigger. Chapter 4. The Journey to Power. As Aiko and I stood outside the training site, I could see the unease in her eyes, a reflection of what I knew to be true. We were still far too weak. Neither of us had even the first cultivation vein yet, and without that, we couldn't even consider fighting beasts, not even the weakest ones in the safe zone. She turned to me, her arms crossed. So what's the plan? You said you had knowledge of places we could mine, but we're not even capable of killing a single beast right now, not without a core. I nodded, knowing her concerns were valid. You're right. We can't kill a beast, not even the lowest ranked one. We don't have a spirit core yet, and without it, we're pretty much sitting ducks out here. Aiko furrowed her brow. And when they test us in a week during the shadow trials, we'll only get 1 spirit crystal each, right? Exactly. I replied. When the trials start, every recruit, no matter their status, gets 1 spirit crystal. That's what we'll use to form our first cultivation vein, the iron vein. But they'll only give us a random low-class cultivation technique with it, and with just 1 crystal, it won't be enough to put us ahead. Aiko was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. So the nobles and higher-class commoners already have an advantage. They've been getting spirit crystals for a while, right? Right again, I said, crossing my arms. For nobles, it's nothing. They've been receiving spirit crystals for years and have already formed veins and cores. Even some middle-class commoners have managed to get a crystal or 2. They'll enter the trials already ahead of us, and when they select the commanders, we won't even be on the radar. Her face tightened in worry, and she asked the question I was expecting. Then how are we supposed to stand a chance? How are we going to get more crystals before the trials? I smiled, ready for this moment. Relax. I know a way. Aiko's eyes widened slightly as she stared at me. You do? I nodded. There's a place near the wild zone, just on the edge of the safe zone. It's a small cluster of spirit crystals, not enough to attract the attention of the City Watch, but plenty for us. The thing is, we can't mine crystals in the wild zone itself. Not yet. But this spot is technically in the safe zone. We can reach it, but we'll need to be careful. Aiko looked skeptical. If it's near the wild zone, wouldn't it be crawling with beasts? Exactly. I said, pulling out 2 small vials of scent-nullifying potion from my bag. Which is why we need these. Drink this, and the beasts won't be able to detect our scent for about an hour. But here's the catch. It's a 2-hour journey. The first hour, we'll be passing through a river where low-rank beasts roam. They won't bother with us if we're careful, so it's relatively safe. But once we reach the last 30 minutes, we'll have to sprint. Aiko frowned, her gaze flicking to the potion. So we only drink half on the way there? I nodded. Exactly. Drink half now, and we'll save the rest for when we're mining and need to head back. It'll be risky, but if we don't do this, we'll have no chance of gathering spirit crystals before the trials. Aiko hesitated for a moment, then sighed and nodded. All right, let's do it. The journey begins. The moon was high in the sky as Aiko and I made our way through the dense forest outside the safe zone, the cool night air clinging to our skin. We kept to the shadows, moving quietly as we made our way toward the river I had mentioned. The first part of the journey was relatively easy. The low-rank beasts that roamed the area were nothing to be afraid of, as long as we didn't provoke them. Occasionally, we'd catch glimpses of them moving through the underbrush. Stoneback lizards, their thick, rocky hides shimmering in the moonlight, and shadow hares darting silently between the trees. We're lucky the lower-ranked beasts here are more passive, I whispered, glancing at a group of ironbeak birds that perched high in the trees. They're only interested in their prey. As long as we don't get in their way, they'll leave us alone. Aiko walked beside me, keeping her eyes on the surroundings. So the wild zones are crawling with higher-ranked beasts, right? Yeah, I said. Out there, we'd be dealing with beasts that could rip us apart without a second thought. But for now, we'll stick to this river path. It's safer. We reached the river about an hour into our journey, the gentle sound of flowing water soothing in the otherwise quiet forest. I motioned for Aiko to stop, and we both knelt down by the water's edge, pulling out our vials of scent-nullifying potion. Drink half, I reminded her, uncorking my vial and taking a sip of the bitter liquid. We'll need the rest once we reach the crystal cluster. Aiko grimaced as she swallowed her half of the potion, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Ugh, that's disgusting. I laughed softly. Yeah, it's not exactly the best taste, but it'll keep us hidden from the beasts. We need it. As we started moving again, I decided to break the tension with some light conversation. So you remember our deal, right? When we make it big, when we've got wealth, power, all that stuff. You said you want maids too? Aiko glanced at me, her expression neutral, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Yeah, what's wrong with that? I grinned. Nothing. I'm just curious, I chuckled. Practical as always, Aiko. And you? She shot back, her tone teasing. You made it pretty clear what you want from your maids. I flashed a mischievous smile. Oh, you know, the usual. Someone to bring me drinks, keep my place spotless, and maybe, if I'm in the mood, fool around a little. Aiko raised an eyebrow, and I could see the smirk on her lips. Of course you would. We kept walking, the banter between us easing some of the tension. It wasn't long before we left the river behind, and the forest started to grow thicker, darker. The further we went, the closer we got to the edge of the safe zone, and the more dangerous the area became. The sprint to the cluster. We're getting close, I whispered as we approached the final stretch. Once we reach the edge of the safe zone, we'll need to run. The potion will last for about 30 minutes once we're out of the safe zone, so we'll need to move fast. Aiko nodded, her expression serious. I'm ready. Good, I said, my voice low. On my signal, we sprint. The tension in the air thickened as we reached the edge of the safe zone. Beyond the trees, I could see the faint glow of the crystal cluster, a shimmering light in the distance, marking our destination. It was so close, but we had to get there before the potion wore off. Now! I whispered sharply. We broke into a run, the sound of our feet pounding against the forest floor, the only noise in the quiet night. The trees flew past us in a blur, and I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins as we sprinted toward the crystals. Every second mattered. If the potion wore off before we reached the cluster, the beasts in the area would sense us immediately. Aye, and we wouldn't stand a chance. But we kept running, our breaths coming in ragged gasps as we pushed ourselves to the limit. 30 minutes later, we skidded to a halt, just as the last effects of the potion began to fade. We had made it. The crystal cluster lay before us, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The crystals were embedded in the rocky walls of a narrow ravine, their soft light casting eerie shadows across the ground. It was a beautiful sight, but more importantly, it was exactly what we needed. Aiko and I stood there for a moment, catching our breath as we took in the scene. We made it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, a grin spreading across my face. Yeah, now we mine. Chapter 5. Breaking the Barrier. The crystal cluster shimmered faintly in the moonlight, embedded deep within the rocky wall of the ravine. As we stood there, catching our breath, I pulled 2 picks from my bag and handed one to Aiko. This is going to take time, I said, my voice low. We'll have to be careful. We can't afford to get caught out here. Aiko nodded, gripping the pick in her hands, determination in her blue eyes. Let's get to work. The long hours of mining. We started mining, chipping away at the tough rock that surrounded the crystals. It was slow work, the pick clanging against the stone, sending faint echoes through the ravine. Hours passed, and every now and then we'd have to stop when we heard the low growls or rustling of nearby beasts. The ravine was close enough to the wild zone that the beasts would occasionally wander into the edges of the safe zone. It wasn't as dangerous as venturing into the wild zone itself, but it was still risky. Aiko and I had agreed on a system. She would act as the lookout while I mined. Whenever she saw or heard something nearby, she would give me a signal, and I'd stop immediately. We had made 2 makeshift hideouts earlier, small caves we had dug near the walls of the ravine, just big enough for one person to squeeze into. They weren't perfect, but they were good enough to hide us from the beasts roaming nearby. We each had our own cave, one on the left side of the ravine and one on the right. Whenever danger approached, we'd dive into them and wait it out. Keep an eye out, I whispered as I raised the pick once more, swinging it against the rock with all the strength I could muster. The hours dragged on. 7 long hours passed, and we still hadn't broken through the crystal's outer layer. My muscles burned from the effort and sweat poured down my face, but I refused to stop. I knew what was waiting for us on the other side of this barrier. Almost there, I muttered, feeling the rock begin to give way beneath the pick. Aiko glanced over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the area. "We're running out of time," she whispered. "There are more beasts than before. We need to hurry." I nodded, swinging the pick with renewed determination. The stone finally cracked, and the shimmering crystals beneath became visible. I smashed the last bit of rock, and the entire cluster broke free, sending a cascade of spirit crystals tumbling onto the ground. I stared at them, wide-eyed. There were more than I had anticipated. Way more. The small crystal cluster had yielded around 218 spirit crystals, far more than I had expected. "We did it," I whispered, grinning as I knelt down to scoop the crystals into my bag. "Aiko, look at this." Before I could finish, Aiko appeared from around the corner, her face pale. "Run!" My heart dropped. "What?" "A beast is coming," she hissed, her voice tight with urgency. I didn't waste time asking questions. We both knew what to do. I stuffed the rest of the spirit crystals into my bag and bolted toward my hiding spot, diving into the small cave I had dug earlier. Aiko ran toward hers on the left side of the ravine, but just as she reached it, she stopped, panic flashing in her eyes. "I can't make it," she whispered frantically, her eyes wide with fear. Before I could react, she turned and sprinted toward me, diving into my hideout just as I slid the rock cover back into place. The close call. Inside the cramped cave, I could barely breathe. Aiko had landed awkwardly on top of me, her chest pressing against my face, completely blocking my vision. Her breathing was ragged, her body tense as we both listened for the approaching beast. "Get off me," I muttered, my voice muffled by her body. "I can't breathe." "Shut up, Ren," she whispered fiercely. "The beast is right outside. It'll hear us if we move." I grunted, feeling my lungs start to burn from lack of air. "I'm serious. If you don't move, I'm going to suffocate." Aiko shifted slightly but stayed close, her face inches from mine. "Don't act like you're not enjoying it. I see the way you stare at them." Under different circumstances, I might have laughed at her teasing, but right now, I was more focused on the beast prowling outside. Still, there was a part of me that couldn't ignore the fact that I was, quite literally, buried in Aiko. "I wouldn't mind if I weren't dying here," I muttered, grabbing her waist and pulling her down a little so we were face to face. "I've got the crystals," I whispered, grinning slightly despite the tension. "We can start cultivating now. Do you remember the breathing technique I gave you?" Aiko's eyes softened and she nodded. "Yes." "Good," I whispered. "Grab a crystal from the bag, hold it with both hands, and recite the technique. Concentrate on it until it disappears, then grab another one." She reached into the bag and pulled out one of the spirit crystals, clutching it between her hands. We lay there in the cramped cave, barely able to move, our bodies pressed close as we began to cultivate. It was a strange feeling, being so close to someone while focusing on cultivation, but I couldn't afford to think about anything else. The long wait. Half an hour passed, and Aiko's voice broke the silence. "It's not working." I turned my head slightly to look at her. "It's working, trust me. The technique I gave you is powerful. It'll take time, at least 2 hours, before your iron vein appears. After that, it'll get easier with every crystal." Aiko nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration as she closed her eyes again, focusing on the crystal in her hands. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, the darkness of the cave pressing in on us as we cultivated. Time slipped away, and the world outside became distant. We were both so absorbed in our cultivation that we barely noticed the passage of time. The beast outside seemed to lose interest and moved on, but neither of us moved from our spot. We continued to absorb crystal after crystal, the flow of energy surging through our bodies, slowly building our strength. The transformation. It wasn't until much later, 3 days later, that we finally realized what had happened. I reached into the bag to grab another spirit crystal, but my hand came up empty. Frowning, I opened my eyes and glanced down. The bag was empty. We had used every last crystal. Aiko opened her eyes, blinking in confusion. "How long?" I sat up, my body stiff from being cramped in the small space for so long. "We've been here for 3 days." Aiko's eyes widened in shock. 3 days? "Yeah," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "We got so absorbed in cultivating, we lost track of time." We both climbed out of the cave, the sunlight almost blinding after being in the dark for so long. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and dirt, and I realized that, in our confined space, we had expelled all the impurities from our bodies, something that always happened during cultivation, especially before forming a core. We were covered in filth, but neither of us cared. Aiko stretched her arms, wincing as she realized how sore her muscles were. "What about our cultivation?" I grinned, feeling the surge of energy coursing through my body. "We've both advanced to the copper vein stage." She blinked, surprised. "Already?" "Yeah," I said. "You're at copper vein, 2 stars, and I'm at copper vein, 3 stars. Aiko stared at me for a moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. "We did it." I nodded, still feeling the energy buzzing through me. We did, and we're only going to get stronger. We stood there in the sunlight, exhausted but triumphant. Chapter 6, Dreams of Command. The morning sun bathed the ravine in a soft, golden light as Aiko and I stood in the open, triumphant after days of cultivating. We were filthy, sore, and exhausted from the cramped conditions in the cave. But none of that mattered now. We had both advanced to the copper vein stage, and I could feel the power surging through my body. Aiko's eyes sparkled with the same sense of victory, and without thinking, we embraced, laughing at the absurdity of it all. "I'll have a blonde maid," I said with a grin as we stood there, still wrapped in each other's arms. Aiko chuckled, pulling away slightly, her blue eyes alight with amusement. "And I'll have a red-haired maid." Our stomachs growled in unison, breaking the moment of celebration. We both looked down and burst into laughter. "Looks like power isn't going to fill our stomachs," I said, rubbing my abdomen. "Let's hunt some food. How about some steel fang hares and river claw fish?" Aiko smiled, nodding in agreement. "I'm starving." "That sounds perfect. The hunt for food." We made our way back toward the river, where I had spotted some steel fang hares earlier. The hares were small, quick-footed beasts with sharp teeth and fur that shimmered in the light. Despite their name, they were easy prey now that we had reached the copper vein stage. After some time, I managed to catch 2, their legs looking more like chicken drumsticks than rabbit limbs. Aiko, meanwhile, used her sharp reflexes to spear some river claw fish, swift, silver-scaled creatures that darted through the water with long, hooked fins that resembled claws. They were a common catch, their meat tender and slightly sweet. We returned to the open field next to the river, where the sun was high in the sky. I built a fire while Aiko skinned and cleaned the fish and hares. Soon, the smell of roasting meat filled the air, and we lay down in the open grass side by side, with a stick of cooked fish and a leg of hare in each hand. As we ate, I couldn't help but smile at how far we'd come. From scrawny commoners without even an iron vein, to copper vein cultivators, now sitting in the open, enjoying a meal together. Life was starting to look a lot better. "Tomorrow's going to be the real challenge," I said, biting into a hare leg that tasted like roasted chicken. "We'll need to start hunting beasts for essence cores and more spirit crystals. If we're going to be commanders in the Shadow Trials, we'll need money to build our guild." Aiko nodded, taking a bite of fish, her expression thoughtful. "The top 30 become commanders, right? But even if we make it, we'll still need a place for our guild." "Exactly," I said, sitting up. "Commanders are chosen based on strength. But after that, it's all about resources. We'll need a base for our guild. The closer we can get to the city walls, the more expensive it'll be. The guilds near the wild zones are cheaper, but it's also more dangerous there. And we'll need spirit crystals to pay the guild members we recruit," Aiko added, glancing at me. "No one's going to work for free." I smiled at her insight. "That's right. And to get enough spirit crystals, we'll need to keep hunting. We're strong enough now to take on some of the lower and middle-ranked beasts in the safe zone. We'll kill them for essence and crystals, and you can turn the essence into beast cores." Aiko's brow furrowed slightly. "You make it sound easy. Beast core creation is tricky. With the level of our cores, there's a high chance they'll break. For every 10 tries, I'll be lucky if I manage to create 3 cores that don't shatter." I nodded in agreement. "Yeah, but that's why we'll hunt as many beasts as we can. If we fail a few times, we'll just keep going until we succeed." We finished our meal, the fire crackling softly as the sun began to set. The night was peaceful, and we both felt confident enough in our newfound strength to sleep out in the open. The low and middle-ranked beasts that roamed the safe zone wouldn't dare come near us now. As we lay back on the grass, looking up at the stars, Aiko glanced at me. "You think we'll make it? As commanders?" I smirked, resting my hands behind my head. "Of course we will. We've already come this far. We just need to stay focused. Tomorrow, we start building our future." Aiko smiled softly, her eyes drifting shut. "I'll hold you to that, Ren." The next morning, the hunt for beast cores. We woke early the next morning, the sky still tinged with pink as the sun began to rise. After a quick breakfast of leftover rabbit, we set out to hunt. Our goal for the day was simple: kill enough beasts to gather a substantial amount of essence for Aiko to create cores, and if we were lucky, find more spirit crystals. The first beast we encountered was a fangtail wolf, a mid-level creature known for its sharp fangs and long whip-like tail. Its core wasn't as valuable as higher-ranked beasts, but it was good enough for what we needed. I engaged the beast head-on, dodging its tail as it lashed out at me and striking back with precise blows. It didn't take long before I brought it down. Aiko knelt beside the wolf's body, extracting the small amount of essence from its core. She carefully stored it in one of the vials we had brought, her movements steady and practiced. "That's one down," she said, capping the vial. "We'll need a lot more if we're going to make this work." We moved through the safe zone, encountering stoneback lizards, their rocky hides tough, but no match for our newfound strength. Each time we killed a beast, Aiko would extract the essence, carefully storing it as we made our way through the forest. By midday, we had collected enough essence to attempt making a few beast cores. We found a quiet spot near the river, where Aiko sat down with the vials of essence laid out before her. "The challenge of core creation. This is the tricky part," she said, picking up one of the vials. "The lower your core level, the more likely the beast cores will break. For every 10 attempts, 7 will probably shatter." I nodded, understanding the risk. "Just take it slow. We've got enough essence to keep trying." Aiko took a deep breath, then began the process of core creation. She carefully poured the essence into her hands, focusing on the energy as she recited the incantation I had taught her. The essence swirled between her palms, glowing faintly as it started to condense into a solid core. The first attempt shattered before it fully formed, the energy dispersing into the air. Aiko didn't react, simply picking up the next vial and trying again. The second attempt failed as well, the core breaking into pieces. It wasn't until the fourth attempt that she succeeded. A small, glowing beast core formed in her hands, its energy stable and complete. "I got one," she said, a smile tugging at her lips as she handed it to me. I grinned, taking the core. "Nice work." She continued the process, creating a few more cores over the next few hours. As expected, most of the attempts failed, but by the end of the day, we had managed to create 3 usable beast cores. A growing sense of power. By the time the sun began to set, we had gathered a respectable amount of cores and spirit crystals. Aiko had grown more confident in her core creation, and I could feel the surge of energy in the cores she had made. We were making progress, slow but steady. As we sat by the river, the sound of the water flowing around us, I held up one of the cores, admiring the faint glow. "This is it," I said, my voice filled with quiet determination. "This is how we rise." Aiko looked at me, her expression serious but hopeful. "We're getting there, Ren. We'll be ready for the shadow trials." I nodded, feeling the weight of the cores in my hand. "We will. And when we do, we'll show them all what we're capable of." As the night fell and we settled down to rest, I knew that the next few days would be critical. We had the strength, the resources, and the determination to succeed. Now, it was just a matter of time before we carved our names into Aslan's future. Chapter 7, The Final Push. The days blurred together as Aiko and I hunted, pushed to our limits by the ticking clock. 2 days remained before the shadow trials, and I could feel the pressure mounting. But with every passing moment, we grew stronger. Each beast we killed brought us closer to the next level. Each core Aiko created brought us more power. We were now deep into the safe zone, pushing further than before, hunting more dangerous beasts. The prey was growing stronger, but so were we. A plan for power. As we rested near the river on the second morning, I laid out the plan. We had 2 days left, and we needed to reach Silver Core by the time we returned to the training camp. "We've made incredible progress," I said, staring into the fire. "But we can't slow down now. If we want to stand a chance at being commanders, we need to be at least Silver Core by the time the shadow trials begin." Aiko, sitting across from me, nodded in agreement. Her blue eyes were sharp, focused. She had become even more efficient at creating beast cores, each attempt faster and more precise than the last. The early failures were fewer now, and her success rate had skyrocketed over the past few days. "Silver Core," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We can do it." I grinned. "We can, but it's going to be brutal. We need to hunt non-stop for the next 2 days. We'll aim for higher-tier beasts, ones that give more essence. We're at Copper Vein, 4 stars now. With the right strategy, we can push to Silver." "What's the plan?" she asked, standing and stretching her arms, the fatigue showing on her face but not in her spirit. I pulled out a small map I had drawn, marking the locations of higher-level beasts I remembered from my previous experiences in the wild zones. "There's a cluster of flameback boars near the western edge of the safe zone. They're tough, but their cores are potent. We'll start there. After that, we'll move toward the Shadowfang serpents by the cliffside. They're deadly, but they're worth the risk." Aiko raised an eyebrow. "And we're still sticking with the scent-nullifying potions?" I nodded. "Only for the first phase. Once we're strong enough, we won't need to hide. We'll be able to face anything in this zone head-on." She smiled, determination written all over her face. "Then let's do it." The hunt for Silver Core. Our journey started early that morning, the cold breeze carrying the scent of earth and damp leaves. The first target on our list, flameback boars. These creatures were known for their thick, flame-colored hides and their fierce tusks, capable of goring even seasoned hunters. But I knew their weakness. They were sluggish, slow to turn, and if you struck at their side, right between the plates of their hide, you could bring them down quickly. As we approached the area where the boars roamed, I turned to Aiko. "I'll draw them out. You focus on attacking from a distance with your light magic. When I create an opening, go for their weak spots." Aiko nodded, her expression serious. "Got it." We found the boars near a clearing, their massive forms lumbering through the underbrush. There were 4 of them, each with glowing red backs and tusks that could tear through stone. I motioned to Aiko to stay back as I pulled out my makeshift daggers, crafted from sharp stones and branches. They weren't much, but I had honed them to a deadly edge. I darted forward, hurling a small rock to get the attention of the closest boar. It snorted angrily, charging at me with surprising speed. I dodged to the side, barely avoiding its tusks, and slashed at its side with one of my daggers. The blade cut deep into the soft flesh between the armored plates, and the boar let out a howl of pain. "Now, Aiko!" I shouted, rolling away from another charge. A beam of light magic shot through the trees, hitting the boar in the same spot I had wounded. The creature stumbled, its legs giving way, and I seized the opportunity. Plunging my dagger into its throat, the beast collapsed in a heap, its body twitching as the last of its life drained away. 3 more to go. The other boars, sensing the danger, charged at us. I danced around them, keeping their attention on me while Aiko fired precision beams of light, each shot aimed at the weak spots I had taught her to target. We worked in perfect sync, the beasts falling one by one. The first core creations of the day. Once the boars were down, Aiko got to work, her hands glowing as she extracted the essence from their cores. She had become so much more efficient at this. The energy swirled between her fingers, and within minutes, she had successfully created 3 cores, each one glowing faintly in the early morning light. "I'm getting better at this," she said with a satisfied smile, handing me one of the cores. I took it, feeling the raw power coursing through it. "You're getting fast, that's for sure." The more essence she worked with, the more confident she became. After a few more hours of hunting flameback boars and stoneback lizards, we had gathered enough cores for both of us to push toward the Copper Vein, 5 stars level. I could feel the energy inside me building, my veins pulsing with power as I absorbed the beast core Aiko had crafted. Reaching Silver Core. By the time we had finished with the boars, the sun was starting to set, casting a golden glow over the forest. We had one more target before we could rest for the night: Shadowfang serpents. The serpents were agile, venomous creatures that hunted in the dark corners of the cliffs. They were fast, their movements unpredictable, but I knew that with Aiko's light magic, we could blind them long enough to strike. Their essence was rare, potent, and exactly what we needed to push ourselves to the Silver Core stage. We found the serpents coiled around the rocks, their black scales glistening in the fading light. I motioned for Aiko to stay back again, then darted forward, my daggers at the ready. The first serpent lunged at me, its fangs dripping with venom. I ducked, slashing upward with both daggers, cutting into its side. Aiko's magic flashed behind me, and the serpent hissed in pain, momentarily blinded by the intense light. I didn't hesitate. I plunged my daggers into the creature's throat, and it writhed in agony before collapsing. Another serpent slithered toward Aiko, its eyes locked on her. Before it could strike, she raised her hands, summoning a bright sphere of light. The magic exploded outward, blinding the creature long enough for me to dash forward and strike it down. We continued this rhythm, hunting more beasts, wolves, lizards, serpents. The more we killed, the more cores we gathered. Aiko's core creation had become almost second nature now, her hands moving quickly as she transformed the essence into usable cores. By the time we were done, we had both reached Silver Core, 1 star, and I had pushed to Silver Core, 2 stars. Arrival at the training camp. We returned to the training camp just as the gates were about to close. The sun was sinking below the horizon, casting long shadows over the camp. My body ached from the relentless hunting, but I felt stronger than I ever had before. The Silver Core thrummed within me, its energy coursing through my veins. Aiko walked beside me, her face tired but triumphant. "We made it," she said, her voice filled with relief. "Yeah," I replied, glancing at the towering gates of the camp. "We're ready." We passed through the gates just as they were closing, the guards barely sparing us a glance. As we made our way toward the center of the camp, I couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence. We were no longer the weak commoners who had started this journey. Now we were Silver Core cultivators, and soon we'd be commanders. Claiming the commander's mantle. We arrived just in time for the testing, our hearts pounding but our faces calm. The testing grounds were crowded with participants and observers alike, all eager to see who would rise to the ranks of commander. As Aiko and I entered, I couldn't help but notice how the nobles were treating the commoners with surprising kindness. The lower-born like us were spoken to with respect, treated like equals in this world. I frowned as I remembered the nobles from the game. It was always the same, their goody-two-shoes attitudes, their righteousness, their refusal to revel in their power. They had everything, wealth, status, and power, but they never did anything fun with it. The protagonist of the game, the so-called hero, had only one wife. He never threw extravagant parties, never drank or celebrated his victories by telling his enemies to suck it. They were boring. But now that I had incarnated into this world, that was going to change. I would do everything they hadn't. I would be reckless, enjoy life, and insult anyone who dared challenge me. I wasn't here to play the hero. I was here to win, and I'd do it my way. As we approached the stone circle where the testing would take place, I grinned. This was our moment. The testing. One by one, the participants stepped into the stone circle, standing in its center while the examiners recorded their cultivation level. The circle would glow, indicating the stage and stars of the person inside. Most of the commoners who stepped in glowed with the faint light of copper vein cultivators. Only a few were higher. The nobles, of course, showed off their strength with confidence. When Aiko stepped into the circle, I saw people whispering. No one expected much from an orphan with no last name. But then the circle glowed, bright silver, and a single star appeared next to it. The crowd gasped. Silver Core, 1 star. Aiko was stronger than most had assumed. Then it was my turn. As I stepped into the circle, I could feel the weight of all their eyes on me. The stone beneath my feet hummed, and then it happened. Silver Core, 2 stars. The silver glow shone brightly around me, and I could hear the murmurs of shock ripple through the crowd. Excitement filled the air. Everyone was talking, buzzing with curiosity and surprise. How had 2 commoners, one an orphan, no less, reached Silver Core? It wasn't unheard of, but it was rare for anyone without noble backing to achieve such power. I stood there, relishing the attention, when I noticed one of the nobles looking anything but pleased. It didn't take me long to figure out why. He had been bumped out of his commander position. You see, only the top 30 could claim a commander spot, and without it, he would lose his noble status. In Aslan, if you weren't a commander, you weren't a noble. The noble houses guarded their spots fiercely, only having one child to avoid competition. If they had a daughter, they arranged her marriage to another noble house to keep the family lines secure. This noble wasn't expecting two commoners, an orphan with no name and a boy from the lower district to take his place. But now he had no choice. He was out, and there was no hiding his frustration. His lips quivered, and I saw him biting back tears. Aiko leaned in close to me. "I don't care for the title," she whispered. "Do you think we can make some money out of him for my spot? I'll just join under you." I smiled, realizing the opportunity in front of me. "I think that's a great idea."
The deal.
The crowd had grown silent as everyone watched us. I took a step forward, raising my voice so everyone could hear. "Listen up, everyone. This is my sister. She doesn't want the commander spot as long as she's under my leadership. Is it all right if we negotiate for her spot?" The nobles, who had been whispering among themselves, exchanged looks and smiled. It wasn't long before they began raising their voices, offering bids for the commander spot Aiko was willing to give up. It came down to two choices. I could sell the spot to one of the nobles who wanted to expand their family's influence by creating an additional noble house. Or I could help the boy who had lost his place regain his status, making him indebted to me. The decision wasn't hard. I accepted the boy's offer, smiling as he handed over a small fortune in spirit crystals. The amount was staggering, more than I could have imagined. But before he could leave, I pulled him aside and leaned in close. "Remember this, your friends, the nobles, were the ones raising the price. Don't forget who helped you." I pressed half of the crystals back into his hands. His eyes widened, and he stammered a thank you, clearly overwhelmed. He would remember this day, and now I had someone who owed me, a powerful ally in the noble class. With the commander titles settled, the selection process began. One by one, commanders were allowed to choose their recruits, starting with the most powerful and working down to the least. When it was my turn, I felt Aiko nudge me before I could even open my mouth. "Pick the red-haired one," she whispered in my ear. I glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "Why?" She gave me a look that made my heart skip a beat. There was something dangerous in her eyes, something that told me I wasn't going to win this argument. "Just pick her," she said. I turned back to the group and pointed to the red-haired girl, the one Aiko had chosen. She was plain, quiet, and not particularly strong, but I trusted Aiko's judgment. Her name was Mira, and as she stepped forward, I couldn't help but notice the curious glances exchanged by the other commanders. Why had I picked her? For my second pick, I knew exactly who I wanted. I needed a crafter, someone skilled at forging weapons and tools. I called out the name of a well-known crafter, surprising everyone again. She wasn't a noble, but she was the best at what she did. Next, I needed someone skilled at mining, and I picked one of the strongest miners I knew. My final pick was a potion maker, someone adept at both alchemy and cooking. These recruits weren't the strongest fighters, but they had the skills I needed to build a powerful and resourceful team. As I approached each of them, I could sense their hesitation. They didn't know me. They didn't know if I had the backing or resources to support them. But I leaned in close to each one, speaking softly so only they could hear. "Instead of 1 crystal, I'll pay you 2 per month, and the contract is only for 2 years. After the training is over, you're free to go wherever you want." Their eyes widened in surprise, and they quickly agreed. One by one, they joined my team, and I saw the other commanders watching with curiosity. They didn't know what I had promised, but they could see the recruits' swift acceptance. Some looked nervous. Others whispered among themselves, wondering why I had only picked women. Finally, when the last of the women had been chosen, I stepped back. "That's it for me," I said loudly. "You can continue your recruitment." The commanders stared at me in shock, unsure of what to make of my decisions. But I didn't care. I had my team, and I had my plan. Aiko stood beside me, her eyes gleaming with amusement as she whispered, "I think they're afraid of you." I smirked. "Good. They should be. Chapter 9. You are my pets now. The selection was over. My team was assembled, and Aiko and I had claimed our place as commanders. But it seemed Aiko had different plans for our recruits. As soon as we stepped away from the testing grounds, she turned to face the girls and took a deep breath. "Listen up," she barked, her voice ringing through the air like a crack of thunder. The entire group froze, startled by the sudden authority in her tone. "You are my pets now," Aiko shouted, pacing in front of the girls like a drill sergeant. "If I say bark, you bark. If I say jump, you jump. Now bark!" For a moment there was silence as the girls exchanged bewildered glances. But Aiko's aura flared, her blue eyes burning with intensity, and suddenly the entire group began barking, their voices echoing through the training grounds. "Bark, bark, bark!" The nobles, who had been watching us with cautious curiosity, suddenly stiffened. Fear flashed across their faces. They had never seen a commoner act like this, so brazen, so fearless, so commanding. Aiko, with her raw, unfiltered power, was now more terrifying to them than any noble commander could ever be. Aiko's lips curled into a satisfied smile as she walked over to the red-haired girl, the one she had insisted I pick. "You," Aiko said, pointing at her. "From now on, you're my personal pet. Your name is Nala." The red-haired girl blinked in surprise but nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Aiko smirked and patted her on the head. "Good girl. Here, have a treat." She tossed Nala a spirit crystal, which the girl caught with wide eyes. Nala's face lit up, the crystal glittering in her hands as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She wasn't offended or humiliated, quite the opposite. She looked... "Thank you," Nala said eagerly, her eyes gleaming with excitement as she pocketed the crystal. Aiko straightened up, her voice sharp as she addressed the group again. "Now march! I want perfect formation. Move it, pets!" The girls scrambled to obey, quickly forming a line and marching in step, their faces a mixture of fear and awe as they followed Aiko's every command. Even the nobles were watching in stunned silence, unsure of what to make of the scene. Behind them, I couldn't help but laugh. Aiko had turned my team into something entirely unexpected, and the nobles were clearly rattled. They had no idea what to make of her, or of me for that matter. They were afraid, and I liked that. Into the wilderness. We left the camp soon after, heading toward the outer edges of the safe zone, where the beasts were fewer but still dangerous enough to keep most people away. With 2 silver core cultivators, myself at 2 stars and Aiko at 1 star, we were more than capable of defending ourselves from anything that wandered into our path. The recruits followed behind, still moving in the perfect formation that Aiko had drilled into them. Every now and then she would bark out orders like an army sergeant, her voice booming through the trees. "You there! Keep your pace! I want straight lines!" she shouted at one of the girls, who immediately corrected her step. "Good! Now stay in formation! You're not allowed to slack off, not even for a second. I see one wrong move, and you'll be running laps around the camp for days." I walked alongside her, amused by how quickly she had taken to this role. She had a natural command over people, a way of making them follow her without question. I watched as the recruits responded to her every word, even Nala, who seemed eager to please her new master. At one point, I leaned over and whispered, "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" Aiko glanced at me, a sly smile playing on her lips. "You bet I am. They're going to respect us, Ren. Fear is a powerful tool." I nodded, glancing back at the recruits. "You think the nobles are scared of us now?" Aiko's smile widened. "Oh, they're terrified." The journey to danger. The first day of travel passed without incident. We moved deeper into the wilderness, pushing toward the edge of the safe zone where the real challenges would begin. The terrain grew rougher as we ventured further from the city, the trees taller and more twisted, their roots snaking across the ground like the claws of some ancient beast. We were heading toward a part of the wilderness where high-level beasts roamed, their territories just beyond our reach. I knew the area well, having studied it in the game. The creatures here were dangerous, but they wouldn't venture too far into the safe zone unless provoked. As long as we stayed cautious, we could camp just before the danger zone and rest before making our final push. Night fell quickly, and the air grew cold as we set up camp in a clearing by the river. We were far enough from the city now that we could feel the presence of stronger beasts lurking in the distance. their growls and howls carried on the wind. But none dared approach us. 2 silver core cultivators were more than enough to keep most beasts at bay. We lay on the ground, using the bags we had brought as makeshift pillows. I kept my dagger close, my senses alert despite the peaceful surroundings. Aiko took the first watch, her eyes scanning the darkness as she stood by the edge of the camp. 4 hours, she said. Then you take over. I nodded, closing my eyes. I knew I could trust her to keep us safe. Aiko was sharper than anyone I'd ever met, and her instincts were second to none. If there was danger, she'd sense it long before it reached us. Night watch. The night passed uneventfully. Aiko kept watch for 4 hours, pacing the perimeter of the camp like a predator stalking its territory. I could hear her footsteps as she moved, always alert, always ready. When her shift was over, she woke me with a nudge, her voice low and steady. Your turn. I sat up, stretching my arms as I stood, and took her place by the edge of the camp. The fire had burned low, casting faint shadows over the sleeping recruits. The forest was still, the only sound the gentle rush of the nearby river and the distant cries of beasts far off in the wilderness. I kept my hand on the hilt of my dagger, my senses sharp as I scanned the darkness. My mind wandered back to the camp, to the nobles we had left behind. They had been so smug, so confident in their power. But now, with Aiko and I in the running for commander, they were starting to realize how fragile their positions were. As the night dragged on, I couldn't help but smile to myself. They were right to be afraid. The final day of travel. Morning came quickly, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the canopy above. Aiko and I woke the recruits, and we packed up camp, preparing for the final stretch of our journey. Stay in formation. Aiko barked as we set off again, her voice just as sharp as ever. No slacking, keep up the pace. We marched for hours, the forest growing thicker and darker as we approached the edge of the safe zone. The tension in the air was palpable now. We were entering dangerous territory, where high-level beasts roamed freely. But we were ready. 2 days of hunting and leveling up had given us the strength we needed. The beasts wouldn't stand a chance against us now. As we reached the edge of the safe zone, I turned to Aiko. We'll camp here tonight. Tomorrow, we hunt. Aiko nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Sounds good to me. I'm ready. We settled down in the clearing, the recruits falling into their routine as they set up camp. The air was thick with anticipation. Tomorrow, we would face the wild zone, and we would prove our strength once and for all. Chapter 10, The Beast and the Base. Just as we were about to set up camp for the night, a low, rumbling growl echoed through the forest, making the ground tremble beneath our feet. I stopped dead in my tracks, every muscle in my body tensing as I scanned the trees. Then, from the shadows, a massive figure emerged. A beast the size of a mammoth lumbered into view, its fur a deep, charcoal black, its claws as long as swords. Its eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger, and its mouth curled into a snarl as it roared, shaking the very air around us. This was no ordinary beast. This was a thunderjaw bear, a creature that dominated the wilderness with brute strength and savage fury. I glanced at Aiko, who was already stepping forward, her hands glowing with light magic. We both moved to the front, shielding the recruits behind us. Aiko, stay sharp, I said, my voice steady but urgent. This one's tough. She nodded, her blue eyes focused, every bit of her power flaring to life. But then something clicked in my mind. This thunderjaw bear wouldn't be roaming here without reason. If beasts like this were close, it meant we were near something important, something worth protecting. I needed confirmation, and fast. Without wasting a second, I leapt high into the air, using all the strength in my legs to launch myself above the treetops. The wind rushed past me as I soared, and in the distance I saw it. A base, hidden deep in the wilderness, just like I had anticipated. The fortified structure gleamed faintly in the fading light, its walls surrounded by a protective shield. I landed back on the ground, adrenaline surging through me. Aiko, take the team west, straight ahead. There's a base nearby. I tossed her the bag of spirit crystals. Put your hand on the shield when you get there. I've already programmed it to recognize your hand and mind. Once you're in, place the crystals in the container inside. It powers the shield. As soon as the team is safe, come back and help me. Aiko caught the bag without missing a beat, nodding as she turned to the recruits. Let's move. Head west now. The team followed her, running through the forest as the bear's growls rumbled behind them. I faced the Thunderjaw bear alone, gripping my daggers tightly as it charged at me, its massive paws shaking the earth with every step. The battle with the Thunderjaw bear. The bear lunged, its claws slicing through the air with brutal force. I dodged, barely avoiding the deadly strike, and slashed at its side with my daggers. The blades cut into its thick fur, but the beast barely flinched. Its hide was tougher than I expected. This fight wasn't going to be easy. The bear roared again, turning to swipe at me with its other paw. I ducked and rolled, slashing at its leg as I passed, trying to slow it down. But the Thunderjaw bear was relentless, its eyes locked onto me with a primal fury. For a moment I considered retreating. I was strong, but this beast was beyond anything I'd fought before. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Aiko sprinting back toward me, her light magic flaring in her hands. "Let's take this thing down," she shouted, her voice filled with determination. I grinned, the adrenaline coursing through me. "Together." Aiko raised her hands, summoning a beam of pure light that shot toward the bear. It struck the beast square in the chest, staggering it for a moment. The bear roared in pain, turning its furious gaze toward Aiko. "Now!" I shouted, darting forward while the bear was distracted. I leapt onto its back, plunging my daggers into its thick hide, aiming for the space between its shoulder blades. The beast howled, thrashing violently as it tried to throw me off, but I held on, my daggers buried deep in its flesh. Aiko unleashed another wave of light magic, blinding the bear as it stumbled backward. With one final powerful thrust, I drove my daggers deeper, severing the beast's spine. The Thunderjaw bear let out a final, echoing roar before collapsing to the ground, its massive body hitting the earth with a resounding thud. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath as the forest fell silent around us. Aiko turned to me, a smile tugging at her lips. "Not bad, huh?" I laughed, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Not bad at all." The base. With the Thunderjaw bear dead, we made our way to the base, following the path Aiko and the recruits had taken. As we approached, the shield shimmered in the air, a soft, glowing barrier that protected the entrance. The recruits were already inside, safe and sound. We stepped through the shield, entering the base's courtyard. It was bigger than I had expected, with several floors and enough rooms to house a small army. The structure was sturdy, built to withstand attacks from the wild beasts that roamed the area. But what really caught my eye was the penthouse at the top, a luxurious space with a sprawling garden and a private hot spring in the backyard. "This is incredible," Aiko said, her eyes wide as she looked around. I nodded in agreement. "We've got a fortress here." We quickly assigned the rooms to the team. The lower floors were given to the general recruits, while the middle rooms were reserved for the 5 I had handpicked. Nala, formerly the redhead girl, the ugly girl, the crafter, the potioneer, and the miner. The penthouse, however, was reserved for Aiko and me. It was the most luxurious part of the base, complete with a lush garden, a hot spring, and a view of the wilderness that stretched for miles. There was only one problem. There was just one big bed. A night of chaos. As the night settled in, I decided to let Aiko and Nala have the bed. They had been fooling around since we entered the room, laughing and teasing each other. I figured they could use the space, so I made my way to the sofa, which was so large it practically felt like a bed. But sleep didn't come easy. The noises coming from the bed, giggles, whispers, and the occasional burst of laughter, kept me awake. I rolled over, burying my face in the pillow, but the noise only got louder. Finally, I sat up, ready to tell them to quiet down. But as I looked over, my eyes widened in shock. Nala was standing beside the bed, wearing a maid outfit, her face flushed with excitement. She turned to Aiko, and then to me. What is this?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. Aiko grinned, her blue eyes sparkling with mischief. "Come join us, Ren." I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could say anything, Aiko nudged Nala. "Nala, tell Daddy to join us." Without missing a beat, Nala turned to me, her voice sweet and obedient. "Daddy, come join us." My face burned with embarrassment, and I felt my heart race. Aiko's grin widened as she patted the bed beside her, her eyes daring me to refuse. For a moment I was frozen, unsure of what to do. But then Nala giggled, her innocent excitement contagious, and I couldn't help but laugh. The night was far from quiet after that. The sounds of laughter, teasing, and play echoed through the penthouse, and even the recruits in the lower levels could hear the chaos. No one slept that night.